Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Afterburn Podcast. I'm Flash McVay, here to host with an incredibly important guest to me. Honored to have Lorenzo Harris on with us today. Lorenzo was my very first operational A-10 weapons officer, somebody that I've looked up to for a very long time. A lot of the things that I do as a patch and as a weapons officer in my other life, it's really because of him, both probably good or bad. Maybe he can talk about some of that stuff throughout this. But Lorenzo, dude, thank you so much for your time and coming on. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff today, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Absolutely, brother. I'm happy to be here. Been watching from the sidelines with you guys doing your podcast. I was waiting for the call, and it finally came through. No, I'm just
I was going to say, I don't think anyone's waiting for the call. Rain talks about it. Can't believe people actually watch this stuff, but they do. So there you go. But all right, so let's just dive right in. Grown up, you've grown up in North Pole, Alaska, great family and stuff like that. Love you guys to be met pretty much everybody in your family. But what got you into flying from young Lorenzo to Colorado State or anything like that? Kind of what got you into it, became your passion, or why did you become a pilot?
Yeah, for sure, man. It's interesting. I meet a lot of people in aviation world, and whether that's at Delta Airlines or in the Air Force or whatever it happens to be, and you ask them their story, and they're like, "Oh, dude, I knew that I wanted to fly since I was like 3 years old. I looked up to the sky and I saw the airplane." And they're like, "Airplane," and like I just knew. For me, it was not the case. I had zero idea that a dude like me could actually become a pilot. Like, no one in my family is in aviation. No one has ever been a pilot. Only a handful of people, and all of both sides of my family have actually went to college and graduated. And so, a lot of what I was exposed to and the expectation that I had for my life at that young age was not to become a pilot. And so, how it happened is, you know, I accelerated in school. I did decent. And so I got a scholarship to Colorado State for electrical engineering through ROTC. At the time, did I want to be an electrical engineer? No. What did I want? I wanted to get out of Alaska, and that was the big driver. And the only way to do that was to get a scholarship. And so I went the ROTC route. My dad was in the military, enlisted, so military just made sense. And so it was kind of like, okay, I'll go do that. And so I left. I'm gone. I'm coming back one of the summers to visit during summer break, and my mom is the wing commander secretary on the base. And like any good mom, she's talking about her son coming home for the holidays or for the summer break, and she's excited and everything. And she's mentioning this around the wing commander, and the wing commander's like, "He's an ROTC, right?" She's like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Do you think he would want to go on an F-16 incentive flight?" And she was like, "Yeah, I think he would." And so they set it up. My mom tells me about it. And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, I guess I'll go." And so the day of, I show up, we get suited out. I only eat a piece of toast that morning because I'm like absolutely terrified I'm going to puke all over the cockpit type of thing. Uh, And then we do the brief, we walk out, we take pictures and all that. And then this moment in time is the exact moment when I realized that I wanted to become a pilot. Okay. And so what happened is, we taxi out. He's making these radio calls. At the time, I had no idea what an unrestricted climb was. Right. And so I remember hearing it though. And we take off. We stay low to the ground, and we're going. And I'm just like everything's just going by me as fast as possible. And then all of a sudden we just point straight up, and I'm like, what the hell's going on? Right. And so here's what happened in my brain at the time. I grew up on an Air Force base my entire life. And then I went to Colorado State. And so what I knew as the world was this base, right? You got your commissary, your grocery stores, your shopping, like
Yep.
power plant, like all of it's there. And so it was my world. And I watched my world shrink to the size of like a nickel in like 20 seconds. And at that moment, that's when I knew, like, oh, there is no way in hell I'm going to sit behind a desk as an electrical engineer. I'm going to apply for this and I'm going to try and, make it.
Yeah.
And so we went out on the rest of the flight. We went to the bombing range. I remember seeing BDU smokes for the first time. We did all that stuff. We came home, we landed. And then that was kind of all she wrote. From there, I went back to school and I applied for a pilot slot, got it, and then graduated with honors and was able to go to pilot training. So that's kind of how I got into aviation.
Boom. And then from there, like pilot training, Laughlin. I believe it was the Laughlin Red Bulls. I was a Red Bull as well.
I was a Red.
And then let's just talk me through post pilot training. You drop A-10s. What was this the path from training and then first assignment, second assignment, and kind of through to the end? Just kind of trace your career real fast, if that's all good.
Yeah, for sure. So, like you alluded to, I went to A-10s. Davis Monthan went through the Lobos. And I'll mention this because this will play a factor later. My first weapons officer in A-10, like FTU, was Rage Donnelly. Okay. And so when I saw that man operate and how he operated and how he was able to basically dig inside my head psychologically and make me a better pilot, that's when I realized, like, okay, I want to become that. Like, if I'm going to be on this train,
Yep.
Everyone's looking up to him. I want to be on that path. So I'll plant that seed now, and then we'll kind of talk about that later. But
we're going to talk about
that. So went through FTU. At this point, I graduated pilot training with all the honors and stuff, and now I'm in A-10 school, and it's a little bit more the cream of the crop. And that's when I realized, like, oh, like I'm not actually God's gift to aviation. Like, you guys were really good, right? So that was my first, like, okay. But what I could do was work really hard. And, for anyone that's out there listening, like, I'm not special in any way, no matter what these stories that you hear. I'm just an extremely hard worker. And I understand that if I outwork the dudes next to me, then I can, at least be on par with them. And if I keep going, yada, yada, yada. So I was able to, graduate there, got my first assignment at across the street, essentially at the 354th at the Bulldogs. Transitioned. And from there, I just started on the path of a lieutenant, doing the standard gig, cooking the popcorn and making crappy coffee. We luckily had a good commander and a good DO at the time who valued, like, training over some of the creep, if you will. And so that really accelerated my growth and my learning. I was able to get into, upgrades fairly, quickly, especially with the FACA piece early on. And then from there in 2009 is when we went on our first deployment to Afghanistan. So that was my first exposure. At the time we went to Kandahar. I'm not going to say it was an uneventful deployment, but it ticked the box for me, and I'll mention that for a reason, because later on, in the second deployment, it was much different. So everything was new on this deployment. What we were doing was new. That the operation was new. Like, all of it was new, the new shiny object type of thing. And so I just went out there and, did my best, worked out all the time, ate good food, type of thing. So
steak and lobster night.
Yeah, right. Came back from that deployment, and then it was basically, go through the retraining phase. And then from there, it was an acceleration straight through all the different upgrades. So straight into the 2-flug, the 4-flug, the IPUG, and then off to weapons school. So it all happened in that first assignment for me.
Yeah. With a deployment.
With a deployment. Yeah. Yeah. Off to weapons school. And this was the next evolution of my, oh God, I am not a good pilot type of feeling. So, I built myself up in the 2 flug, 4 flug, and IPUG, as they should. And then I get shipped off to weapons school and realize that I'm amongst the top of the top. And the guys that were there with me were, leaps and bounds ahead of me. And so that was a scrap for sure. I was the classic story where I show up on a Monday and by Friday I'm nearly packing my bags, type of thing. So
Yeah.
weapons school was definitely interesting and stressful time for me. Left weapons school and then went back to DM for a couple months and then moved to Moody Air Force Base, where I was the weapons officer for the 74th Thunder.
Thunder.
And
Thunder.
then from there, as a tier 1 patch, we can jump into that. But as far as the timeline is concerned, took a deployment in 12-13, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And then after got back from that, transitioned to wing weapons officer, after a year transition before the deployment. Stayed until 2014 and then came back to weapons school as an instructor, where I've kind of dwelled for the last 10 years as active duty and a reservist.
Boom.
Yeah.
And then now, recent retiree.
Recent retiree.
You can go get your Afghanistan veteran hat from the BX anytime you want.
Absolutely. I'm going to take my time at the commissary during the early hours too, and just like clog up the lanes, all of it, dude.
Yeah. And we'll get into kind of more specifics a little bit later on, but Delta Airlines pilot, and then also kind of personal coaching in all kind of things, finances, leadership, motivation. But we'll talk to how you got into that towards the end, because it's an incredibly interesting story. And jumping back into a little bit of what Lorenzo was talking about, was people go to weapons school and like treat themselves as weapons officers for a host of different reasons. Generally, nobody comes into the Air Force like knowing exactly what a weapons officer is, unless you have like a parent or a sibling that is one. And so while I had weapons officers myself going through B course, like the thing that kind of made me want to be one was in fact kind of Lorenzo. So like your Rage Donnelly story is similar to most people that end up becoming a weapons officer. Is they see a weapons officer that they want to emulate, and then they kind of talk to them a little bit and kind of see what they're all about. And I just distinctly remember when we were in the 74th, of you being like, "Hey, why would you want to be a weapons officer? One, don't think you're good enough." I think those words came out of your mouth. But then the other one was just why. Like, why do you want to be one? And really talking through that is an interesting thing. So cool. Like again, as you're going through, you're at Moody as a weapons officer. That's where I'm going to kind of focus some of this time a little bit. Is a lot of people, why Lorenzo said these stories you hear about me, that he's not very special, but you do work incredibly hard. That is facts, by the way. A lot of people in the A-10 community kind of look up to this guy as a little bit of a kind of Mount Rushmore instructor pilot. You taught a lot because you're at the weapons school for almost 11 years. And so it's like just every weapons officer that has become an A-10 patch in the last 11 years has gone through the Lorenzo gauntlet, if you will, on how they've done this. So, but kind of something that I noticed when you were the patch at Moody was kind of your mindset and how much you just immersed yourself into being a weapons officer and being an A-10 pilot. Can you kind of talk to me about just like your mindset about how important was being an A-10 pilot and a patch to like your identity as a human during those times? Did you have any other hobbies? What else did you do with your life? But like, how important was it? And then just kind of talk, was it a good thing for you, bad thing for you? And then we'll jump into the other stuff later on.
Yeah. So I'll kind of attack the first question. My general thoughts and philosophy when I was sitting in the seat. And when I walked into that position, the burden that I put on myself at the time was that all the faces in the room are going to come home if I build them up appropriately, right? And
Yeah.
so you can feel the weight of that like thought process,
Yep.
because it's one thing to just walk in and say, I'm the lead instructor and I'm just going to teach academics and teach flying. It's another thing to say, I'm responsible for every single man and woman in this room coming home from whatever it is they send us into. So that was the first piece. The second piece to that was, if any of my pilots are out there and they're not able to bring the individual home who they are helping, then that is also on me. So that was the burden that I put on myself. And that was the weight that I was carrying as far as my day-to-day mentality, with trying to ensure that I was preparing every pilot in that room for what we were going to get into, whatever it happened to be. And so
Yep.
that was the underlying like fire that was always burning for me, that I had to like show up. And so you can see how that train of thought is much different than, I'm here to teach academics and I'm here to, build two flugs and iPugs and whatever.
Flying Moody 2 on a Thursday. Like,
Exactly. Yeah. And so, that is how I approached the job. That's how I approached the position. That's how I approached life at the time. It was that I had to do everything I could so that there was nothing left on the table. So there was no question in any pilot's mind that what we were doing, what they were going to do, how they were going to operate, how they were going to execute, and how they were going to show up for the mission. And the mission being ensuring that we protected every single individual that we hopped on the radio with. So that really is how I approached the job overall.
yep.
And I always hoped that I did well enough at it. It's only now, multiple years later, that I'm actually hearing some of these, responses and memories from guys that I, instructed or was a, part of their journey as well. So that really is that piece. How did it affect me overall, and who was I? Dude, that was it. That's all I
Yeah.
was. Right. And so this actually leads into part of my evolution, because after our deployment, and then that kind of like in between period where I was like this like flight commander right before I left to go to weapons school, is when I started to think like, dude, if something were to happen and I was to leave this earth, what would my tombstone say?
Yeah.
And at the time, all I could think of was son, brother, pilot. And in my mind, that didn't sit well, because I was like, dude, I don't want to just be known as that. Like there's more to me. And I've spent the last, 2 years at that point pouring everything into this one particular thing, but I don't want to be known as that only. And some of that had to do with the deployment itself. That deployment that we went on was very different from the first deployment. That
Yep.
particular, environment that they were putting us in, and the things they were asking us to do, started to not make sense to me. And so that's when I also started to think about like, the seed was planted
Yep.
of, if I have to now turn around because the path that I'm on and be standing in front of the room as the DO or commander and give the hoorah speech, let's go do this. Like, would I be able to give that hoorah speech based off of the information and my understanding of what we're going to go out and do? And after that deployment, I didn't want to do that. Like
Yeah.
like that deployment planted that seed that like, as much as I love what we're doing, I don't understand what we're doing. And so it was hard to get behind. And I'm not one to like hold back. my thoughts on
This is
things.
true.
I'm not one that's willing to lie to guys either. And so that was starting to weigh on me a little bit of like, okay, dude, the path you're on right now is going to be, go to weapons school, become an instructor, then be a DO, then be a commander, and you're going to be standing in front of these guys. And if they go ask you to take 40 men and women to go do what we did, on our deployment, are you going to be able to stand there with truth in your eyes, and truth in your heart, and speak to these individuals about what we're going to go do? And at the time, the answer was like, oh, I don't think so. So
Yeah.
that kind of led into what happened when I got to weapons school. And that was the first evolution of me trying to develop more of Lorenzo. I told my buddies at the time, like, I'm just going to have a Renaissance year, like old school Renaissance man, where, you read these tombstones of dudes back in the day and it's like playwright, poet, politician, financier, like, all this stuff. Like, that's what I
Yeah.
was trying to do. So I spent a good year or two where I was just building out, like, what are my hobbies? What do I like to do? I took up snowboarding. I took bartending class just because, like, I started doing all these different things to kind of figure out, like, hey, what else do I like in life aside from just being a pilot?
Yep.
Um, and so, yeah, that kind of started the evolution of the next chapter. But I'll kind of leave it there for now. I think I
Yeah.
answered
Yeah.
most of the
No, you
questions.
did. No, you did. And that's kind of the thing that we look at. And I just finished the Evolution of Seed series and talking to people like who have been wild weasels and performed a specific mission in every conflict since Vietnam. And the conversations that we had, one is like the cool parts, right? Is like the cool parts, like shooting the missiles, dropping the bombs, doing all these different things. But then there was always this like underlying thing that came out of every single conversation was then they were like, and I did it because that was my job. And I believed in the fact, like for the Vietnam guys specifically, they go, I needed to shoot that missile so that the B-52 didn't get shot down. They did not say, I need to shoot that missile so we win the Vietnam War. It was like a completely separate thing because, and we don't necessarily get into it, but we talk about it is like, you and I, like, we don't talk about whether we agree with the war in Afghanistan or Operation Enduring Freedom. We talk about and dig into and build our entire identity around the fact that when we are in those positions, the person I'm flying with comes home and the person I'm supporting on the ground comes home. And that's it. It's like, let the policy be the policy, but then that's kind of very micro, like in the moment. But then the macro, once you come home, is you're just like, dude, what happened? Like, what was the deal? And then now you start to, it impacts you throughout the rest of your life on what you're doing, if that is truly like life's purpose, if you will. Not to get too deep into it, because at the same time, everybody out there listening, don't get it twisted. I think Lorenzo does. I love being a fighter pilot. And a lot of times, like when we're in the seat and like sticking throttle, like we're hacking the mish and being stone cold killers. But that doesn't mean that there's not a human aspect to it, like when it's kind of all over. And as you evolve and mature as a pilot, it always kind of comes to a head depending on what your experiences are. And so I know like the reason I became a weapons officer was because my experiences were like, I looked up and I thought, hey, Lorenzo has a really good mindset on how he teaches and develops humans and is also really good in the airplane and works incredibly hard. But then also like all the other conversations that we had about life and things of that nature. So of wanting to go become a weapons officer just took a little longer for me than one assignment plus a deployment because I had to go fly the F-16 for a while. By the way, I do understand why that F-16 ride would make you want to be a pilot. So that is incredibly understandable from this. All right, so let's talk about that 2013 deployment. It was my first deployment. You had been the squadron patch, and then you transitioned to be the wing patch. So we had our boy Pong as the squadron, and then you were kind of on the other side, building like the operational, trending tactical, kind of thing going down range. We won't talk about. Actually, you know what? We will real fast. One of the things Lorenzo said about making sure that everybody came home. My first time leading downrange as a lieutenant, Lorenzo was just like, well, I put this dude and I signed off on him being a flight lead as a lieutenant. I will fly his first sortie that he leads in combat. Your A-10 was damaged because I flew you through lightning. But we won't talk about all of that. But it was the fact that Lorenzo was like, hey, I'm not going to let anyone fly with him except me because I was the one that kind of signed off on this. So I appreciate that. But I did get you struck by lightning. That's all we'll talk about from that story. But so the deployment itself, I've talked about it on previous pods, specifically when I was the guest, but then in other ones, is that deployment was difficult for different reasons. Like it wasn't necessarily that we were just out really ripping bombs, specifically not bombs, and things like that all over the yard every single day, danger close. But talk to us, kind of set the stage a little bit of what was difficult about that deployment from what you as an operational kind of thinker was imparting on the squadron and like what we could and could not do on that deployment. Go ahead.
Yeah. So most of our deployments up until that point, it was more or less clear cut what we were doing because we were supporting US NATO forces on the ground.
Yep.
So it became very easy to understand, like, all right, we got US troops outside the wire. We're there to do overwatch, convoy escort, whatever it happens to be. And so the mission was kind of like pretty much clear cut. On this particular deployment, with all the withdrawing, downsizing, and everything, we started to shift our focus to not so much the clear-cut mission of helping dudes outside the wire, because now they're pretty much inside the wire. And now we were kind of transitioning into this, like, let's help out the Afghan forces with air power. But they don't have the structure to do that. And then, let alone like jurisdictional, this, that, and the other. So it turned into this weird, like hybrid version of supporting through the telephone game and not truly understanding like what we could and couldn't do at times. And so from my perspective as the wing weapons officer, I'm sitting in the room on the telecon with, the 4-star, the 3-star, 2-star, 1-star, the colonel, all these guys. And I'm listening to this stuff and I'm trying to then take that information and, for lack of a better way to put it, like dumb it down to the lowest common denominator for the squadron. Yeah. So that we could understand
yeah,
this is what we're doing. So it was really difficult, from that perspective, to try and make the pieces match, because it wasn't what we had trained for the last, 6 to 9 months of, hey, you go out, you check in with the JTAC, you run your CAS cadence, you do what they ask type of thing, you employ if you need to employ, and then you come home. Now it was, we're going to go out, we're going to talk to a JTAC, but he's going to be 60 miles that way. And we're going to be watching some Afghan guys that we don't have communication with that are on a telephone talking to an interpreter who then is talking to the JTAC. And so now it just became this weird, like, mission set that was very uncomfortable, because there wasn't no clear cut, like, understanding of, this is my mission and this is when I can employ weapons. This is when I should not be employing weapons. You know what I mean? It just became
absolutely
weird. And so that is when I started to have the first inklings of, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing? And that sat with me, throughout half of that deployment. Because the first half was like, okay, we're getting there, we're getting spun up, we're doing the thing, we're going out on missions and things were getting hot. And then we started transitioning to where it's like, okay, now we're doing this weird Overwatch thing, telephone game. And then that's when I just started going like, bro, like, am I willing to die for what we are doing right now? Am I willing to die if a American is outside the wire to protect him? 100%.
Yes.
Am I willing to die because of a telephone game and me trying to help these guys out that I have no like control over or understanding of what is actually going on down there? That's when it started to, tip the scales a little bit for I don't know exactly what we're doing anymore.
Yeah.
And
That's
now I don't know how I would stand in front of a room and tell everyone else like, let's go do this thing, because it's not what we had originally like signed up for, if you will.
Yeah, and I distinctly remember both before and very quickly after arrival, um, you and also like Fold of Frag dudes like that, staying in front of the room trying to answer questions from guys like me, such as, "Hey, so if I'm employing under ANSIF ROE or US ROE and I'm wrong, what's gonna happen to me?" Like it's not like, hey man, what if I put a bomb on the wrong target? Like, how do I reattack tactically? Like, how do I execute this? It's what's going to happen to me as a human legally if I'm wrong, and people
Yes.
kind of flying scared. And how did you manage that?
Oof. Um, yeah,
Did you see that? Did you see that? You recognize that, right? Like the whole thing.
oh yeah, yeah. And that's what I was meaning by like,
Yeah,
I was
exactly.
sitting in these rooms, and I'm hearing what they're saying and I'm asking the same questions to them
Yep.
so that I could come back and stand in front of the squadron and give you guys answers so that you felt comfortable. And so it was like
It was
trying to
weird.
be a lawyer, and I had never trained at lawyer speak, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, a lot of my a lot of my time was spent with ROE, with discussing these particular topics with individuals that could give me answers. And so I spent just hours and hours on telecons discussing this with, AFCENT, the groups over there, and trying to figure out like all these answers to these things. And a lot of the time I didn't get answers. And that's what was frustrating, is because then I had to go, okay, well, now I have to interpret it myself and give you guys an answer so that you had something to hang your hat on. And so
Yep.
now that whole burden of like, trying to figure out how to make you feel comfortable going and executing the mission kind of filtered through me, and having these discussions and trying to figure out, the best way to approach it and give you guys a solid answer. And it was difficult. Like I did not enjoy 1 minute of
Yeah.
that,
No. No.
deployment.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We saw it. I saw it. It's now. I mean, I've then been in that position as a weapons officer at a later time, and I was like, well, this is how Lorenzo handled it. So this is what I'm going to talk about. And I mean, we're talking like within the last week, like asking some of these questions. But all right, well, let's. I'm going to dive right into a topic, and it's a difficult topic, I know, for you, and it is for me as well. But the date is April 6th, 2013, and I got stuck in the Azores. Due to a unfortunate boom operator legal incident, uh, and got into the country on the a little bit late. You guys had already been there for like 2 or 3 weeks, maybe like 2 weeks. And my very first combat sortie was armed overwatch. Or sorry, my very first combat sortie was just my LAO. We didn't do a whole lot, but my second combat sortie was armed overwatch of Viper 2-1 recovery, because the first day I got there, a Viper unfortunately crashed just south of Bagram, Mano Steel, and didn't make it. Just crashed into a mountain and passed away. So that second sortie was Slobo Radican. I go out and we just fly over the top of the recovery effort for 3 hours, and guys on the ground are talking about like, hey, we found portions of the wing. We found and then they cleared us off when they said, hey, we found the cockpit recording, like the cockpit recorder. So an incredibly just sobering mission. But then all of a sudden, 3 hours, you guys are cleared off. tick Alpha Alpha 01, Kunar Valley, go talk to both either Dark Knight or this dude named Misfit, from what we ended up going with. And a transition from 3 hours of no talking. Like me and Slobo probably said like 2 clear to the tanker. Like that's it for 3 hours. We check in on the radio, and the proverbial like A-10 teach tape of guys screaming on the radio. And we check in, and we end up, Slobo rolls in and employs, he shoots 100 rounds of gun. I roll in, don't get clearance, come off dry, but then we get ripped out. But then for the rest of the day, our squadron is assigned to that troops in contact. I don't remember exactly which hog number you were, but it was pretty early. Mm-hmm. And you were there and did a lot of good work. Ended up, for whether he would say it or not, ended up being awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross for your efforts in that mission. But can you talk to us about the scenario? And then we're going to dive into the aftermath of that after that, if you don't mind. Over to you.
Yeah, for sure. I think we were Hog 5-3.
Then, yep, that dude, it was you. You ripped us out. Like, you were the second ones there. We were there for 5 minutes, employed one time. There was like, we need you now. And then we were out. I didn't even shoot. Slobo did. And then you came in because they launched you guys because we were at the end of our bowl.
Yeah. So what I remember is, checking in, getting the AO handoff, and we had data link at the time, which was
helpful,
massively helpful, because we were able to just pass off all the different points to which employment was occurring and stuff like that. And so when we got there, it was like any other troops in contact. It's like hot and heavy at first when you're checking in because you're trying to get spun up, and then things were kind of dying out a little bit. Okay. So when we first checked in, maybe the first 20, 30 minutes, it was like busy, and whatnot. And then like the action, if you will, on the ground just kind of slowly started dying off a little bit. And then it kind of, stayed quiet for about time warp, right? 15,
right,
20,
yeah.
30. And then it started to pick up again. And so at this point, for those that aren't familiar with this whole entire scenario, what essentially had happened is there was a small team that was in a compound. And in this part of Afghanistan, it's a very mountainous terrain. And so where they were sitting was in a valley, and they were surrounded essentially by high ground. And there was like a single road that maybe had like a river next to it that kind of led up in to where this little compound area was. And so what these guys were, in was essentially a situation where, 360 degrees from the high ground with individuals they can't find, they can't see, that are just taking shots at them. And at the time, one of the individuals had been wounded. And so, there was like, all right, we need to get this guy out of here type of thing, but they're also taking all this fire. So at that point, what I remember anyway is, situationally, we had the guys on the ground. None of them were JTAC qualified. The JTAC was actually dislocated, probably 20 miles away. So we were talking to him on SATCOM. And then early on, it was just us two and maybe a UAV that was providing overwatch, or maybe there was a UAV that was en route. And now they wanted to try and bring in helicopters to try and get this guy out. That was going to be one of the things they were going to try. But then that quickly got turned down because it was too hot. And then eventually it turned into, okay, we need to send in a QRF. And I don't remember how many vehicles it was. Just call it maybe 20 with, a handful of dude in each vehicle. And so at this point, how I can, kind of piece it all together was, the fire would essentially go up and then come down, go up and then come down, go up and then come down. And it was never from the same spot. So now we're playing this game where we're talking to the guys on the ground and taking in information from them, relaying that information to the JTAC so that he understood the ground situation, so that he could then give us a clearance to employ weapons on the new spot that they were taking fire from. And so, yeah, I don't know, maybe an hour or 2 hours into it, it's like I said, it's going down and coming up, going down, coming up, but it's always like elevating a little bit.
Yeah.
And so now, we are employing weapons, rockets, guns, on all these different positions. There's at least a UAV overhead at this point, if not two. And then throughout the course of the time that I was there, they additionally sent some Apaches in, right? And I just want to paint the picture of the air at this point, for how saturated it got. And this really is the reason why I ended up getting the DFC, in my opinion. But with the UAVs, the Apaches, now we get sent another 2 ship of A-10s. So at one point, I know there was definitely 4 of us. There may have been 6 of us. I can't exactly remember. But if there were 6 of us, we were like kind of doing a handoff game. And then at one point, we got an AC-130. And that AC-130 ended up almost running out of weapons because he was employing so much. And so they sent another AC-130. So now in this stack, we have a 4 ship of A-10s, at least 2 UAVs, an AC-130 overlapped with another AC-130, and AH-64s. And then at some point, as this QRF is coming up the train, now we have 2 additional JTACs in this QRF. There's one in the lead vehicle and one in the trail vehicle. And so now, painting this picture, you have like all those aircraft stacked up. You have a dislocated JTAC who I'm talking to on SATCOM. And then you have 2 JTACs who are slowly getting closer and closer to the situation, right? And so when it comes to the JTACs, you have 3 dudes within relative close proximity that can all provide some type of clearance and all have varying levels of situational awareness to what's going on. They definitely have situational awareness to their own position. So like when the lead vehicle is taking fire, the trail guy has a different situation at the tail end of the convoy, that he's encountering. And then the JTAC that's dislocated is trying to figure all this out. So this is where, for me, it was a mission of controlling the chaos, right? And so to this day, like I think about it, and at no point did I want to be there. I remember distinctly thinking in the cockpit, like, please let this end. Like that is how intense it was, because it took every single brain bite that I had to not only fly my aircraft and be a good flight lead for my number 2, who was very young. It was his first deployment, and he didn't know what was going on. Come to find out after, he was like, "Dude, I had no idea what was going on. I was just following you around." And to his credit, he was a good number 2. Like he kept his SA high enough to where he could employ weapons when I needed him to, and then provide timely inputs with regards to the way he understood the situation at the time, and then could inject something that could help out the situation. And then I had another 2 ship behind me. So I'm leading the 4 ship. I'm trying to control the fires of the AC-130 in coordinated attacks with us. So now you have them employing and us employing basically sequentially or sometimes simultaneously. And then we would have the UH-60 or the AH-64s come in on attacks. So now you have A-10s, AC-130s, AH-64s all attacking at, again, sequentially or simultaneously or kind of like dislocated, if you will. And then you'll have the UAVs who would, do their classic jump in over SATCOM and garble the radio for a little bit. So that's always fun. And then we have the 2 JTACs who at any given time were under fire, right? So now, for those that aren't familiar with the A-10 cockpit, we have 3 radios. And so trying to manage all those 3 radios, you got one on SATCOM talking to a guy that's far away. You got one that's tied for interflight, and then you got one that's tied to the 2 JTACs that are on the ground. And meanwhile, you have this stack of aircraft that are all trying to employ weapons at any given time. And so that entire thing that I just presented was what occurred during like my 4 or 5 hours out there when I was out there. And I was there from, essentially the beginning.
The start.
Yeah, pretty much the start through the QRF, pretty much getting all the way there. And meanwhile, this entire thing is going on because these guys are pinned down, and then the one individual's like critically wounded. And so the name of the game for me at that point was like, everything that I can do to like, again, let this guy come home. Like that is the only reason that I exist as an A-10 pilot, is so that these guys can all come home.
Yep.
And so, yeah, that really sums up, the big picture of it all. And, like I said a minute ago, like at no point was this
Did you want to be there?
Yeah, a fun experience by any means. Luckily, the training, like when they say you will fall back on the level of your training, like that is exactly what occurred. There were times out there where like I just more or less went on autopilot, and my thumb is moving and my mouth is talking, and I'm flying the airplane. But it was like that old school moment where he's standing on stage and then he like blacks out and he like says the most ever, and then he's like comes to and like what just happened. Yeah. Like that's what was happening at times out there. And then I would, like come out and be like, okay, where are we at now? And it just became that repetitive cycle of like action, bring my head back out. Okay, what's going on? Trying to keep my SA up with everything, all the moving parts, and then fuel is always a consideration, in these scenarios. So like, yeah, man, it was intense. It was intense.
For everybody kind of listening, when you look at it, is like when Lorenzo's talking about like falling back on your training, is you were a highly trained and incredibly proficient A-10 pilot, like at the time. And I know that when guys are kind of talking about it, did you end up controlling the stack, like becoming almost, did you take FACA responsibility at times doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So because the JTAC was dislocated, the primary JTAC anyway, for him, it's a difficult situation, right? Like to have the control over the stack in the manner that he would want to have is almost nearly impossible. Time delay of a SATCOM call is a killer right there. And then just his overall situational awareness was, a telephone game essentially. And then the 2 JTACs that were on the ground, they were almost, the second they got within range, yeah, they were heads down, in contact. And so it quickly became a situation where, like you said, my FACA roles and responsibilities, training from all those years back under Rage Donnelly, really became a big factor. And so, yes, I was controlling the aircraft. I wasn't providing clearances per se, because we would ensure that we got the 3093 accomplished and got the 9 lines out and things like that. And I wasn't, giving guys cleared hot, but I absolutely was setting up every single attack for everyone, ensuring deconfliction of aircraft, and then ensuring that they were hitting the right thing, whether that was my marks or, whether it's digital or, kinetic, whatever it happened to be. So yeah, man, it was absolutely it essentially turned into a FACA mission.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like for that is you're saying is, again, going back to what you said at the start, is you're making sure everybody's coming home. You're making sure the dudes in the ground are coming home. And then because of the scenario, what was on you was not only just doing basic A-10 shit, is just like the stuff that all of us can do when you go on autopilot is like hit a 30 wire and drop a valid bomb, but not all the things that we can do and ensure that the A-64s get put into a place where they can both execute their attacks and not run into a mountain. That you can make sure that the AC-130s, when we start calling like south, west, north, when they're going in around their wheel to shoot, that they don't run into an A-10 on a similar run-in axis. And you're kind of controlling all that stuff. And not everyone can do that, but kind of contributing to the controlling the chaos, if you will, is all of that was on your brain. And then the fact that it ended up working out for the most part, which we'll end and get into the aftermath here in a minute, is just, from what I would expect, an incredibly mentally draining mission once you're out of it. And then unfortunately, because like what you were talking about, it never ended until truly somebody was just like, go home. Because you had been there for the whole time doing it from start to finish. And now it's like, hey, every A-10 that's going to launch out of the 74th Fighter Squadron today is going to this Troops in Contact. And it's time to start bringing Lorenzo home. And you set the kind of the stage for everybody to come in, have the SA, and make sure they knew what was happening at that moment. And then that we can actually make sure that that QRF makes it. So then kind of the next question I have is with the guy who's critically wounded, and then after the sortie, like what did you find out was the overall result of that mission?
Yeah. So later on, I found out that he didn't make it. And so my primary mission as an A-10 pilot, like I said at the beginning, was to ensure that everyone comes home. And so he didn't. No more steak dinners, no more apple pie, no more hugs with the wife, hugging the kids. Like, I don't know his full story, but you can extrapolate like type of thing. And so that's why this particular mission, this particular day, is what I refer to as the day I never talk about. After all the stuff that did happen, and as much as people tell me that I did some crazy, amazing things, someone didn't make it. And so that's what ended up being the result in my mind that happened that day, regardless of all the other stuff that went well. For some reason, the only part that I can think of and the only part that I dwell on is the fact that he didn't make it home. And so, that is what ended up manifesting over a couple of years. So yeah.
Yeah. And again, these are stuff that I appreciate you talking about this. And we talk about like May being Mental Health Awareness Month. This exact same thing. I had a conversation, a friend of mine, a really good friend of mine. I won't say his name until he actually gives me the approval to post his episode, but this exact same thing happened to him. He got a DFC. He showed up to a Troops in Contact where 88 Rangers, he saved 88 Rangers. Like that is just a fact. But he thinks about the 2 that didn't make it. And it's really stuck with him for the rest of his life. And I know you feel the same way because we talk about being a fighter pilot, and like a lot of the stories we tell is the stuff that you did that no one else could do. You got a DFC and employed a bunch of bombs and high fives in the bar and stuff like that. But the story that does need to be told in conjunction with it, at least I feel it needs to be told, is kind of that human element that goes along with it on how it does impact people going on. Because again, this in no way takes away from the fact that I personally think Lorenzo Harris is the best A-10 instructor I've like ever flown with, along with McGraw Mitchell and guys like that. But that it sticks with you, and it impacts how you approach situations, both in a cockpit, out of cockpit, in uniform, out of uniform, and how you kind of end up living your life for the rest of your life. So that is the day you never talk about, which you talked about just now. So I appreciate that. Thank you. But all right. So what did you do about it? how did it impact you negatively? And then where are you today?
Yeah. What's interesting is we spend all of our time training, preparing to go out and get the 9 line, roll in, squeeze the trigger,
Yep.
hit the pickle button, whatever it happens to be. We spend zero time talking about what does that mean to you? Like, actually, like, what does it mean? You know?
Yeah. Why am I
Um,
doing this?
yeah. And more importantly, like, uh, I think early on we sign up for it, but we don't know what we're signing up for 100%.
Yeah.
Um, and what I'm getting at here is part of this job sometimes will include like taking someone's life,
Yep.
right? And so we don't talk about dealing with those factors later on.
Or we compartmentalize it and say that that's the cool part.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like
you're right. 100.
killing people breaking their things is like the stuff that we like, yeah, like high five and all this stuff, which is great, which is,
Mhm.
you need to do it. But a friend of mine called it healthy compartmentalization. Is like,
Yeah,
hey, you need to do that. So anyways, we compartmentalize it is what we do.
we do. And that's absolutely what I did. Interestingly, I don't smoke cigarettes, right? The only time I've smoked cigarettes in my adult life
I
has
remember this.
been after like a handful of sorties that were like this. And so, I remember after this one, like coming back, getting out of the cockpit, walking straight into Intel. And before I even give the like Intel report or whatever, it's like, does anyone have any cigarettes? I need to go outside. And I like would sit by our little outdoor fire and just smoke a cigarette, just to like decompress because I didn't have alcohol. But part of the reason I'm mentioning this is
Yep.
later on, when these thoughts start to creep up, like there, I didn't get trained on how to deal with them. And so I started seeking some way to numb it, to make it just go away. And so, you know, alcohol has always been a part of my life as far as an adult, up until about 2 years ago when I just completely quit. But that was something that later on started to manifest, in a negative way with regards to my life. Whenever I would think about some of these things, it would just be easier to like go grab a 6 pack and, like just start handling it that way. Yeah, versus actually kind of thinking about it and feeling through, what was going on. So that happened for a handful of years. Again, this was in 2013.
Yeah.
I still, I went to the weapons school. I was an instructor there, and so I had kind of a new mission, a new focus, new purpose at the time. And then that continued until about 2017, 2018, when I transitioned to a reservist. So now my role got reduced as far as, the amount of attention and focus that I'm giving to the students in the weapons school. And now I'm working at Delta Airlines and then coming in as a reservist. So I'm one step removed. And then as I went on from like 2017, 2018 to 2020, I just slowly stopped flying, and having less of a role, which is fine. It was kind of like what I was going for, but this also takes away from your purpose, right?
Yeah.
And so everything that we have talked up to this exact point was, I am
Everything is
here
an
to,
A-10 pilot.
yep, I'm here to fulfill this mission to bring these men and women home. And so now that is starting to get removed. And so, I didn't realize this at the time, but part of what was happening is I didn't have a purpose. Like my purpose was, you know, getting removed slowly by me becoming a reservist and flying less and less and less. It was easy at the weapons school because now I'm teaching these guys to go teach other guys to bring people home. So the purpose was very clear, but now I'm taking a lesser role. And so around 2020, COVID starts happening and all that stuff. And then what really stirred my pot was when the Russia-Ukraine conflict kicked off. Okay. So now I'm sitting here seeing what's happening on the news, on social media, and I'm looking at the way people are viewing Russia and Ukraine. And in my mind, I'm going, okay, this isn't too much different from what we did. Like, we went into this country and we started slinging stuff all around and people were dying. And so for some reason, my brain went into this like, well, you're no better than them and everyone's calling them evil. So by default, you're evil. And so all of a sudden, I had this like, holy shit, like I'm an evil person. All of these things that I've done is complete evil. And I couldn't shake this thought. And this is what triggered like just a spiral for the next almost like 9 months. And I couldn't figure it out. And it got so intense at times that I'm talking like the first time it really sprung out at me is I'm getting ready in the morning. I'm supposed to go fly at the base. And I'm putting on my flight suit. And all of a sudden, like I'm zipping up and I look up in the mirror and I see myself in this flight suit. And dude, I just break down. Like bawling, crying in front of the mirror, grown ass man, like, and I cannot control it. And so I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And like, it was like, I had zero control over Lorenzo anymore. And I am someone who, if I can control it, I will control it. Understanding that I can't control outside external circumstances,
Yeah, absolutely.
but everything within my span, like I can control. And I definitely have control over my mind. And all of a sudden, I've lost control. Like, it's hard to explain to someone just like all of a sudden like that, you're just crying and you don't know why. And
Yeah.
so I call in and I'm like, hey, I can't fly. I can sit top 3. So I go in, sit top 3. Fast forward maybe 3 days, I'm on the schedule again. And the exact same thing happens. And so now I'm like, okay, something is seriously wrong. Like I'm having these like episodes now. It's stuff you hear about.
Yeah. Yeah.
See in a movie and you're like, oh, that'll never happen to me. And so that then started happening more frequently. I would be driving down the road, going to the gym, and a song would come on and the song would trigger a thought and the thought would trigger these episodes. And I would just have to like pull over. And
Yep.
I'm sobbing and I'm like, I don't get it. I don't know what's going on. One of the other instances that I distinctly remember, and this is how uncontrollable it was the new Top Gun came out. And dude, my entire, like, this entire story was, built around the original Top Gun, right? Like when you find out you're going to be a fighter pilot, Top Gun becomes like your Bible of sorts, right?
That's right.
Yeah. And so they announced this, it's coming out. I'm like, oh, dude, I can't wait for it. I'm so excited for it. I go with some friends, we're watching it, and they get to the scene where they're out in the desert, very similar to out here in Nevada, and they're doing the practice bombing runs. And for some reason, that scene became so surreal for me. And it just brought me back to like 2015 out on the range with, a student at weapons school. And then that just brought me back to like, the deployments and all this other stuff. And in the middle of the movie, my heart just starts like racing to the point where I'm like, oh God, oh God, oh God. Like I don't know what's going on. And I then start crying. I get up, walk out, and I just go sit in the bathroom for what ended up being like 45 minutes. And then I come back, and the movie's like in the last scene and they're like, doing their thing against the Sams and whatever. And then the movie's over. And my friends are like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And so at some point in here, I elected to start talking to a VA psychiatrist. And, you know, what I will say about therapy
Yeah.
is it wasn't like all of the sessions were like banger and I was able to work through everything. A lot of them were just like, "Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your feelings." And I'm like, and then I would leave the session and be like, "Okay, that was worthless." But there was one session and there was one question that absolutely changed everything. And the question she asked me, this was like near probably our fifth session, is knowing what you know now about the world, about the government, about the military, about everything that you've done, knowing what you know now, would you still make the same decisions with that information? And I'm like, no, I would not. And so then she's like, okay, so if all those actions that you did, you're perceiving as yourself as evil, but now you're telling me with new and different information, you wouldn't make the same decision. Are you still evil? And I was like, well, no. And so we left that session. And from then on out, it became like, oh, I am not an evil person. There may have been some things that I've done in my past that I did because I had certain information at the time. But now,
Yep.
given different information, I wouldn't make those same decisions. And so it helped me detach the two. And so then I realized, like, okay, you're not an evil person. And then that launched me into, okay, let's build myself into the version of Lorenzo that I want to be. Um, and then throughout that process, essentially starting then, that's when I went on this real hard journey of, climbing out and building up. And a lot of that, was done through nutrition, fitness, taking care of the physical body first. And then it happened with just feeding my mind the correct information, the correct
Yep.
mindset stuff, the right type of positive reinforcement that I needed, and then also being really real with myself, not like learning that we tend to lie to ourselves about what we either are capable of or what we're actually doing in life, how hard we're actually going in life, the effort we're putting towards the things that we want as far as our dreams and goals and whatever. And so I was able to kind of deconstruct from there, where I was, and then build this new storyline. And then every day has just been steps to make those dreams and goals a reality. And then I picked up into nutrition and coaching, fitness coaching, whatever. I had done a little bit of it in the past, just prior to COVID. And then I kind of took a downtime with it. And then once I kind of came out of this and I was like in the clear, then I was like, oh my God, I need to help people. And it turned into an interesting way of like my mantra of like, I need to save one more. Right. Like, so the same mission that I had before, which is everyone comes home and I need to save these guys, ended up being this same mission, but with a completely different, mechanism to get there and a way to get through to people. And so that's really what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
I'm helping guys that are in a position to where, they are spiraling in some manner. Maybe it's not military related. Maybe it's just life, because there's a lot of issues we have in our country right now, and they're just in a little bit of a spiral, or they're spinning their wheels and they can't figure it out. And then I kind of like bring everything together and then walk them through everything that I went through. So this is everything that like I did for the last 4 years. And I just kind of like break it down and go, here, dude, here's how we're going to step out of this one step at a time.
Yep. And like that's an incredibly powerful thing to kind of share, because you look at it and you say, actually, let me rephrase this, is the way that you look at it now. And when you're talking about, it was so important to you to make sure that like guys like me could do the right things in a cockpit, like could do the right things in a cockpit, make sure that everybody comes home, all these different things. That's who you like were as an A-10 pilot. And then once it kind of started going away, then you start to kind of wonder what you were doing, like why was it the way, like, but it wasn't necessarily like how you approached the situation, because you put all of your effort into just making sure everybody around you was the best version of themselves, at least in my opinion. And then now when you started to realize that you weren't being the best version of yourself because you were putting all of that into someone else, and then you kind of retreated back into like kind of looking internal, is now you found a new path. Do you feel that you found a new path with similar kind of mechanisms that you had back when you were a younger Lorenzo, like how you taught people and things like that, but now it's just in a different manner? Do you feel, are there parallels to the two? I don't know if that's a good question or not.
No, there absolutely are. In fact, I posted on my Instagram the other day a post, a carousel about the way I coach,
Yeah.
because I was having this like introspective moment one morning where I'm thinking about like, my coaching, my philosophy, how I approach it and everything. And I realized a lot of it was exactly that. It was what I used to do, but now I'm just doing it in a different like area. And
Yeah.
so 100%. And I don't want anyone to get, it twisted with regards to like me having regret or anything like that
No.
with regards to anything that I've done. My past, the people that I've, instructed or taught or led or flew with or anything like that. I know that everything has led me to this point, right? And so I'm very grateful for where I'm at, and I'm very grateful for my past. And now I just am at a point where it's like, okay, that old purpose, that old life, those old dreams and goals, you've done that. And now I need to look at what are the next 40 years for me going to look like? What are those dreams and goals? And then how can I give back as a complete person? And really, this just comes back to what my purpose is now, which is
Yeah.
to create the man that I admire in all ways and give that man to the world.
Yeah.
So every day I wake up, it's like, I'm going to create the man that I admire. And then I break it down into all the different areas of what I consider a great man to be. And that's what I work on internally. Externally, I give that man to the world. So I have to figure out a way, and then this goes for anyone, like you have to figure out a way to give back, and you have to figure out a way to help others. You have to figure out a way to lift them up when they're down, things like that. And so that's kind of where I'm at
Yeah.
now.
And like that's incredibly important, just like you're saying, is you had different goals, but it's like just because you use the same concepts and methodology to give yourself to the world, like a similar concept methodology, just to be like, hey, let's debrief that. Like just because you might want to use that doesn't mean that's who you now are as a person, just because you use the same concepts. It's like
100%.
you've become through what I've seen, just like a different person, one that you are more comfortable with, one that you, in my, like, not to get too touchy feely, but it almost is like a person you love more, like you love yourself more now than maybe you did in the past. Um,
1,000%.
yep. And all the things is like, that I've always kind of said is like, you done good, in my opinion, all the way up into through all those difficult experiences, because you taught guys to be able to do the things they needed to do in the moment that they needed to do it, so that potentially, like, what if, yeah, like, so potentially, like, they were able to save someone, so they never have that experience of being the person in the air that couldn't save someone. It's like that you were able to do that. I know that for a fact. So it's one of those. But now, as once again, Snapper Shearer kind of talked about it in an episode, that he's just like, man, all of a sudden, once that purpose started to wane, I had to find something else. Like, I had to, and he was able to do so. And it looks like so are you. And for everybody out there, as far as Lorenzo's coaching philosophy and business in all reality, I'm going to post that in the comments, and kind of give a shout out because it's great. And if anybody is struggling, like, call this guy and can help out, or just wants to become, again, that better version of themselves. So yeah, I think that's something good that you can literally, in my opinion, again, you can be the best at your job. And in my opinion, I keep saying it, but that was you. And that's the thing for a lot of people, but that doesn't mean that that is who you are as a person. And once you kind of find that, then you need to then live with yourself first, and then give it back so that other people around you can see that you are, like, can see who you are. And sometimes that's difficult being a fighter pilot, when it goes away. And a lot of people struggle with it. And I just want people to know that it's a thing, and it's a good story to kind of tell everybody that you're not alone out there in any way. For that. So, all right, we're coming up to the end of this discussion, but as far as just like your coaching or anything, like, parting words you want to share with the masses, give you the last word. And again, like, dude, feel free, plug up what you're doing now so that you can help someone out.
No, I think the biggest thing through everything is, I've done some extraordinary things, and I did that through hard work. So, I've never been the biggest, the strongest, the fastest, the smartest. So for anyone that does have those dreams, just realize that you can get there with hard work, 1000%. And I'm a testament to that. And I didn't even talk about all the times that I failed in aviation throughout my career, and I was still able to come out on top with regards to awards and things like that. So that's the first piece. And then for the second piece is kind of what you're alluding to. So for anyone out there that's struggling, I thought, during some of these times, I would wake up in the morning and I didn't want to wake up and face the day type of thing. I wanted to go back to sleep and sleep for another 18 hours and then wake up the next day. It'll get better, but you just have to keep showing up, and then it will get better. But you have to work on it. You have to put in the effort, and the life that you want is completely in your control. And so I would just leave people with those two things.
I love it. Thanks, man. For all the listeners out there, I hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I have. And then again, just getting to catch up with Lorenzo is important to me, and it's something that I want to look at is like the relationships that you have in life and the people that you've met, the impact that they have on you, and then kind of building those relationships back up, so that you can, again, be who you are in life. And so again, I thank you very much for sharing. And then anybody out there, like, subscribe, hit us up. We'll talk about this. If anybody wants to reach out, put some comments down there. Thank you guys so much for listening. And Lorenzo, appreciate it, man. Have a good rest of your day.
Absolutely. You too, brother.
See ya.